Hi, welcome to Cubs and Culture for January 22nd, 2018. Still nothing has happened in baseball over the last couple of months. We're still waiting on the fourth for the final rotation spot to come in for the Cubs. Right now it's Mike Montgomery. So again, I don't necessarily feel like forcing a baseball topic. So I just happened to rewatch Master and Commander because it's whatever. And mainly because I'm still really upset about the government shutdown and this sort of what's happening in this country. And this movie I really, really like. Kind of because and kind of in spite of the fact it's probably one of the most conservative movies I've ever truly seen. And I mean conservative is a weird word. In a sense, pretty much every single film released by Hollywood is conservative, or at least not subversive, or barely sort of subversive, because of the economics of movies. The truly leftist fare, you're not going to find being released by Fox. Any case, excuse me, Master and Commander it came out in 2003. It didn't do very well at the box office, though it was nominated for 10 Oscars, won 4 or 5 BAFTAs, which is the British Oscar. Got some Golden Globes. So, in one hand, I admire this sort of book, the book sort of its orientation politically, because it is sort of again, it's something if you're going to it's conservative in a good way, it's sort of authentically conservative. Okay, anyway, before I get into that, let me quickly talk about the reception. Now, if you don't know the movie is based off of the series of books by Patrick O'Brian. There's 20 of them, or 20 and a half of them, because the author was halfway through, or 2/3 of the way through the last one. So there was always this plan, and this movie was developed in mind of this being the first of not necessarily of a trilogy, but of a couple of at least 2 or 3 films or 4 films, a periodic series. Except because it didn't do very well at the box office, that never happened. So it made it cost $150 million to make, and it cost about made about $212 at the box office. The thing is, and what I want to talk about with the reception is, I think it was mishandled. So generally speaking, what happens is, January through March are when, for wide releases or movies that are released that year, that's the dumping ground where there's a whole bunch of movies where the studio knows they're bad, or they're highly, highly risky, they're likely to fail, etc. Then in April, then starting in late March through about late August is sort of the prime tentpole season. This is where you get all the sort of big action movies that do the most amount of box office every single year, as a action summer sort of movies, and then at the end of October you have another dumping ground where you have movies which they're probably good movies, but the studio's concerned that they can't quite compete in the summer. Then starting in November through December is when they get released all their prestige pictures, because there's sort of a self-reinforcing cycle with the Oscars. Most Oscar movies are released in November and December. For the last movie that wasn't for Best Picture, that wasn't released in November and December, you had to go back to Gladiator, which was something of a surprise that was as well liked by the award circuit as it was. And then prior to that, you have to go all the way back to Silence of the Lambs in 91. So this movie, Master and Commander, despite the fact that it had a $150 million budget, it was released November 14th, and it didn't really do badly in terms of week to week business. So it had very low drops and everything like that. Like the first week it only dropped 20%, second week dropped like 20%, etc. The thing is, because it was released sort of as a prestige picture, the way in which the marketing positioned it was sort of an historical drama, prestige Oscar movie. And I actually think, even though it is that, I mean, like, that's a fair rendering of the movie, I think it would actually have been better because in 2003, Pirates of the Caribbean 1 just came out, even though the time period's like 100 years earlier and Pirates of the Caribbean's not a serious film in the summer. I actually I would not have released this movie in 2003. I would have waited just 1 year and tried to reposition the film as a tentpole. Maybe not like April or May, but try August. But for whatever because then you could have say, hey, if you like the and reposition it not so much as an historical drama, but as sort of an action adventure story, which it also is. And I don't fully understand why Miramax and Fox just didn't wait 6-7 months, because of the way in which this is also when Lord of the Rings, so like it wasn't going to win Best Picture or anything like that. It's just like this entire film feels mishandled to me because it was a sort of a more serious version of Pirates of the Caribbean that was kind of not really, but in the same sort of broadly similar genre, that it was released too close to Pirates because it was held back as a prestige picture, but then it like didn't really work. So it's always been a huge disappointment to me. Anyway, so I described the film as conservative, and it is. It's actually more conservative is a funny word. It can apply to a whole bunch of different ideologies, but when I think of conservative in the sense, it's like Edmund Burke or Burkean. So one of his most famous quotes is, "The individual is foolish, but the species is wise." So basically, it's this notion that individual men here and there are corruptible, but sort of God and country, these grand institutions, teach us the way in which of being, and we need to protect sort of the institutions of society because of collective wisdom. Obviously, the military life actually applies to that very, very obviously. The other sort of thing that makes it particularly Burkean is, of course, this movie takes place in the Napoleonic Wars, and the French Revolution was, from Burke's perspective, a horrible overreaction. Okay, and then sort of the other things about Burke is he believed in hierarchies were natural, that especially around property relationships, that through, again, this is pretty standard economic conservatism, that we live in a society that awards merit, and because it awards merit, if someone's rich, they deserve it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the entire thing is hierarchies are sort of natural and property is natural, that there's certain laws that govern the universe, usually given from God or from, we can know it's like through reason, about how the way in which society is. Let me pause for a second. So, for example, serving your country in the military is thus the way of things, because that is what society needs. And so it's sort of putting the collective institutions in front of the individual with sort of a healthy suspicion around individuals being corrupted. And so, obviously, a movie where the British are fighting the French in the Napoleonic Wars kind of naturally lends itself to sort of this view of God and country. And the thing I like about this is this movie a lot is there's this great interplay between Jack was the captain, and Stephen, who was the doctor. Yes, this is probably pretty common trope, right? But you can almost see, the relationship, and I'll get into this a little bit more detail in the next section, as a conversation between someone who believes in hierarchies being natural or nature itself is hierarchical, the great chain of being, whereas someone who is sort of more interested in the egalitarian, that nature is much more about liberty, about fraternity and equality. That there aren't really hierarchies in nature. That nature is far more dispersed and different. And so there's this great tension between these two characters in the movie, where it feels very much like the movie is ultimately very conservative, but it feels like it's sort of the movie's sort of discussing with these two characters, sort of the age of reason's arguments between like Burke and other sort of more egalitarian liberals thinkings, or more naturalistic, like naturalists as in Darwin, thinkers. Okay, let me pause there.